Let your breath slow now, and let your thoughts drift somewhere quiet and far away. It is the early hours of a Saturday morning in March, and the great airport at Kuala Lumpur rests in its familiar stillness. The departure halls are quiet, the long corridors lit by a low, even glow that falls gently on the polished floors. Ground crews in high-visibility vests move slowly across the tarmac, their footsteps lost beneath the distant hum of machinery. A Boeing 777 sits at Gate C1, its white fuselage catching the orange wash of sodium lights from the terminal roof. Fuel lines are connected, catering trucks ease gently alongside, and the whole routine of departure unfolds with quiet purpose. Inside the terminal, passengers for flight MH370 gather in soft clusters near the gate, some reading, some resting with closed eyes. The destination board reads Beijing, and the scheduled departure time glows in gentle green numerals, 12:40 in the morning. Beyond the terminal windows, the runway lights extend in two long parallel lines toward the invisible horizon. The air is warm and faintly humid, carrying the subtle scent of tropical vegetation that surrounds the airport on every side. A gentle drizzle has fallen earlier in the evening, leaving the concrete apron gleaming faintly under the lights. The cockpit of the aircraft is illuminated in the softest blue and amber of instruments being carefully brought to life. And somewhere in that quiet, ordinary night, this flight and this aircraft would become one of the most enduring mysteries of our time. Long before midnight, the aircraft sat quietly at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bathed in the soft amber glow of the terminal lights. Ground crews moved slowly around the plane, their movements unhurried, checking fuel lines and cargo holds with the quiet rhythm of a familiar routine. The Boeing 777, registration 9M, had flown this route hundreds of times before, a dependable silver shape against the equatorial sky. Inside the cockpit, instrument panels glowed softly with familiar green and amber indicators, each needle resting at its calm, expected position. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah arrived early that evening, a man who had spent more than 18,000 hours among these skies. The pre-flight checklist was long and methodical, each item read aloud and confirmed in the unhurried cadence pilots learned to trust. Outside, the tropical air was warm and still, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and distant rain somewhere beyond the runway lights. Fuel sensors were checked, hydraulic pressure confirmed, navigation systems initialized one by one in the quiet order they always were. 239 passengers boarded slowly through the jet bridge, finding their seats as the cabin filled with the gentle murmur of settling. Overhead bins clicked shut one by one, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly to a warm, comfortable glow for the overnight journey ahead. The engines began their slow, deep awakening, a low vibration that settled through the floor and into the bones of the aircraft. Air traffic control gave final clearance in the usual calm voice, and the plane rolled gently away from the gate into the warm Malaysian night. Everything about that pre-flight check was ordinary, careful, and complete, each system reading exactly as it should on the 12th of March, 2014. Somewhere above the dark ocean, the cabin lights of MH370 slowly faded to a gentle blue glow. Passengers settled into their seats, blankets drawn up, heads resting against cool window glass. Outside, the South China Sea stretched endlessly beneath a clear, moonlit sky. The hum of the engine settled into a low, even rhythm, filling the air like a quiet lullaby. Flight attendants moved softly through the dimmed aisles, checking on passengers who had already drifted off. The aircraft had climbed to 35,000 feet, where the air is thin and the stars feel very close. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah sat at the controls, the cockpit instruments casting a soft amber light across his hands. The autopilot held the plane steady on its course toward Beijing, everything calm, everything in order. Below, the ocean moved in slow, invisible swells, indifferent to the quiet world passing above it. Most of the 239 people on board were asleep by now, unaware of anything beyond their dreams. The plane crossed over the coast of Malaysia, its navigation lights blinking steadily in the dark air. On radar screens far below, the aircraft appeared as a small, steady green dot moving north across the sea. And then, at 1:19 in the morning, that quiet green dot simply faded from the screen. The South China Sea stretched out below, a vast and quiet expanse of dark water moving softly under the night sky. At cruising altitude, the Boeing 777 moved steadily northward, its cabin lights dimmed, most passengers already settling into rest. Far below, fishing vessels drifted in small clusters near the Malaysian coast, their lights barely visible through the thin sea mist. The sea at this hour held a particular stillness, the kind that settles long after sunset when the wind has eased and the swells grow long and slow. Inside the aircraft, the hum of engines was a constant and steady companion, felt more than heard through the thin walls of the fuselage. The flight had passed over the coast of Malaysia and was now crossing into international airspace, the last land already falling behind in the dark. At the Lumpur Air Traffic Control Center, the blip of MH370 moved slowly across the radar screen, calm and unremarkable. The first officer exchanged routine words with Kuala Lumpur Control, a calm voice in a calm night, the kind of transmission that goes unremembered. And somewhere in the water beneath, currents moved in their old patient ways, carrying warm surface water slowly toward the northeast. The clouds to the north were sparse that night, and the stars above the South China Sea were clear and steady, indifferent to what passed below. MH370 was due to cross into Vietnamese airspace soon, and Kuala Lumpur Control prepared to hand the flight off to Ho Chi Minh City. The handoff was a routine thing, a few quiet words, a frequency change, a blip passing from one sector to the next. And then, in the way that the sea receives a stone and closes over it without a sound, the signal from MH370 quietly ceased. The last transmission from flight MH370 came just after midnight, a calm and practiced voice speaking quietly into the dark. The co-pilot's final recorded words were unhurried, almost gentle, as if the night itself were listening. He said, simply, "Good night, Malaysian 370, and then the radio fell quiet across the South China Sea. Air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur noted the handoff and waited, as they always did, for the next voice from the sky. No voice came. The transponder signal, which had reliably marked the aircraft's position, faded away somewhere above the waters between Malaysia and Vietnam. The plane did not turn, did not broadcast an emergency, did not call out into the frequency it had always used. For a long moment the sky held everything the world expected of it, and then quietly rearranged itself around an absence. Investigators would later piece together the final minutes from radar returns, satellite handshakes, and the memory of a microphone click. That click, brief and almost inaudible, may have been the last human gesture from inside the aircraft. Someone's hand, perhaps, resting on a switch in a quiet moment above the sea. The plane continued northwestward for a time, steady and level, as if everything were proceeding exactly as planned. And somewhere in that steady, unhurried flight into the early morning, the cockpit kept its final words gently to itself. Somewhere over the dark waters of the South China Sea, a small green dot moved steadily across a radar screen. It was flight MH370, a Boeing 777, heavy and unhurried, climbing through the quiet night sky. Air traffic controllers watched the blip move in its slow, familiar arc northeastward toward Beijing. Then, at 1:21 in the morning, the blip simply stopped appearing. Not a gradual fade, not a slow drift, just stillness where a moving point had been. The controller in Kuala Lumpur tried again, sending a routine call into the frequency, and heard only silence. In the quiet of the radar room, a chair rolled back slowly and someone leaned closer to the screen. The transponder, the device that tells radar exactly where a plane is, had gone silent. Without it, the aircraft became something radar could only sense faintly, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Military radar in Malaysia, scanning for other purposes entirely, caught a faint return moving west, back across the peninsula. The plane, if it was the plane, was turning, quietly, without announcement, and heading somewhere no one expected. For a while it continued across the Andaman Sea, and then even that faint trace faded from the screens. And somewhere beyond the reach of any radar, the aircraft continued on, alone in the wide, unhurried dark. In the radar room, the green sweep arm moved slowly across its dark face, tracing the same quiet arc it always did. The controllers had watched that line for hours, reading its familiar language of blips and returns. And then, at 2:40 in the morning, the signal that carried flight MH370 simply was not there anymore. Not a fade, not a drift, just an absence where a 300-ton aircraft had been a moment before. A controller leaned forward, resting his eyes on the place the blip had been, as if patience might bring it back. He tried the radio frequency, the calm standard call that pilots receive 100 times on any ordinary flight. The frequency returned only the soft hiss of open air, the sound of a channel with no one on the other end. Somewhere to the east, over the dark water of the South China Sea, nothing answered. A second controller tried the emergency channel, the one reserved for moments when everything else has gone quiet. It too held only silence, the particular silence of a sky that had swallowed a voice whole. In the hours that followed, the screens in Kuala Lumpur and in Ho Chi Minh City both told the same quiet story. Military radar tapes, reviewed later in careful silence, would show a faint return turning slowly back across the peninsula. But in those first still hours, the controllers only knew what the screens showed them, and the screens showed nothing at all. In the gray hours before sunrise, search planes lifted slowly from runways still wet with morning dew. They flew low over the southern Indian Ocean, where the water stretched unbroken in every direction. Below the wings, the sea moved in long slow swells, patient and indifferent to the search above. Crew members sat at instrument panels, watching radar screens glow softly in the cabin half-light. The radar swept in quiet arcs, searching the water for any shape that did not belong to the sea. Sometimes a shadow appeared on the surface, and the plane banked gently to circle closer. More often it was kelp, or a piece of drifting foam, pale against the deep blue water. The ocean offered no easy answers, only its own slow rhythms and its quiet expanse. Far below, the water temperature was near freezing, and currents moved in patterns that changed daily. Drift modeling teams on the ground studied charts quietly, adjusting the search grid with each new tide. The planes flew in long parallel lines, each pass covering a measured strip of open water. Hours passed slowly at altitude, and the horizon held nothing but more horizon. And as the fuel gauges fell and the planes turned homeward, the sea remained as it had always been, vast and still and full of its own silence. In the long corridors of Kuala Lumpur International Airport, families gathered quietly, holding small paper cups of tea that had long gone cold. Mothers sat with their hands folded in their laps, eyes resting on the middle distance, somewhere beyond the walls. Children curled against their parents, too young to understand, sensing only that something slow and heavy had settled over everyone. Outside, the runway lights blinked their slow, steady rhythm across the tarmac in the early morning gray. Airline staff moved quietly through the halls, speaking in low voices, offering what little comfort the moment allowed. On a whiteboard near the family assistance area, someone had written a flight number in careful letters, MH370. Hours passed without announcement, the terminal clock moving forward in its slow, indifferent way. Outside the tall windows, the sky shifted from deep blue to pale gold, and still no word came from the sea. Some families had flown in from Beijing through the night, arriving into an airport that had no answers waiting for them. A woman held a photograph against her chest, its edges worn smooth from hours of careful holding. The hotel nearby had set aside a floor of rooms for families who could not bear to leave the airport grounds. Prayer mats were laid out in a quiet corner of the terminal, and the sound of low murmured words drifted briefly through the air. And so the families waited, together in that gentle, aching stillness, the way people do when the world has not yet answered. The Indian Ocean stretches far beyond the horizon, its deep blue surface resting beneath a pale and quiet sky. Somewhere beneath that stillness lies the deepest part of this ocean, where the water turns a shade of blue almost beyond imagining. The southern Indian Ocean is one of the most remote stretches of open water on the entire planet, weeks away from any shore. Search vessels moved slowly through these waters in the months and years after March 2014, their instruments listening to the silence below. The ocean floor here is uneven and ancient, shaped by ridges and valleys that have never once felt the light of the sun. Towed sonar arrays were lowered into the deep, trailing behind ships like long quiet thoughts sent down into the cold. The water at those depths reaches temperatures close to freezing, utterly still, undisturbed for thousands of years. Hydrophone stations far away had recorded a faint acoustic signal around the time the aircraft disappeared, a soft sound in the deep. Scientists studied that signal carefully, tracing where it might have originated, somewhere in that wide and featureless expanse. Satellite data had narrowed the area to a long arc across the Southern Ocean, the last known corridor where the plane had flown. That arc was vast, covering thousands of kilometers of open water, and somewhere along it the ocean held its answer quietly. A small piece of wing, called a flaperon, washed ashore on Réunion Island more than a year later, carried by the slow ocean currents. The ocean had kept everything else, settled deep and undisturbed beneath its blue surface, patient and unhurried as always. Far out across the southern Indian Ocean, the sea stretched in every direction without a horizon you could quite name. In the weeks and months after March 2014, oceanographers began to trace how things move across that enormous, quiet expanse. Ocean currents there follow ancient, patient paths, the West Australian current, the South Equatorial, turning slowly like breath. A piece of debris released somewhere in those waters might drift for a year or two before touching any shore at all. Scientists built computer models, seeding virtual particles into reconstructed currents and watching where the simulations carried them. The models pointed, again and again, to a long arc of the Southern Ocean, the seventh arc, as search teams came to call it. And the real world, slowly, began to agree with those quiet calculations. On a July morning in 2015, a beach worker on Réunion Island noticed something pale and unfamiliar caught among the rocks. It was a flaperon, a wing control surface about 2 meters long, barnacled and salt-bleached from a long, slow journey. The barnacles themselves carried a story. Their growth told of months adrift in warm tropical water before washing south. In the years that followed, more pieces arrived, a flap track fairing, a horizontal stabilizer fragment, an interior panel, each on a distant shore. Each piece had traveled thousands of kilometers, carried by the same patient currents that drift everything in that part of the world. And somewhere beneath those slow-moving waters, the ocean still holds whatever it has not yet chosen to return. Along the volcanic shore of Réunion Island, warm waves moved slowly across black sand in the early morning light. A beachcomber named Johnny Baig walked quietly along the Titiline, as he did most mornings, watching the sea deliver its quiet offerings. Half buried in the sand lay a large curved piece of white composite material, roughly 2 meters long, battered and encrusted with barnacles. It was weathered by the sea, patient and silent, as though it had traveled a very long way to arrive here. The piece was a flaperon, a movable surface from the trailing edge of an aircraft wing, designed to help guide a plane gently through the air. Serial numbers and maintenance markings were still faintly visible, preserved beneath years of salt and growth. French aviation authorities carefully transported it to a laboratory on the mainland, where technicians worked patiently to confirm what it was. In time, investigators confirmed the component matched the specific design of a Boeing 777, the same model as MH370. It was the first physical fragment of the aircraft to be found, more than 500 days after the plane had disappeared. Oceanographers traced the currents backward through time, following invisible paths the sea takes between the southern Indian Ocean and the shores of Réunion. The mathematics suggested the debris had drifted for well over a year, carried gently on warm currents all the way from the far southern waters. Somewhere far to the south and east, beyond all mapped shipping lanes, the rest of the aircraft still rests quietly on the ocean floor. The Flaperon arrived alone, a quiet messenger from that distant place, and the sea offered nothing more. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, a fragment of wing drifted slowly through warm, clear water. Barnacles had grown across its surface in the months it spent wandering those distant currents. Each tiny shell carried within it a quiet record of the water temperature where it had lived and grown. Scientists gently studied those barnacles, reading their calcium like slow pages of a drifting journal. The barnacles had known warmer water than the southern Indian Ocean currents usually carry. This whispered something quiet about the path the debris had taken before reaching the cold southern latitudes. Slowly, oceanographers traced those probable paths backward through months of drifting time. The warm current zone the barnacles remembered pointed gently toward the northern tropics. Far to the north, where equatorial warmth lingers year-round, the water holds those temperatures the barnacles carried. Each barnacle ring told of seasons passing slowly above an unknown resting place far below. And yet the ocean kept its own counsel, offering only these small shells as its gentle reply. The debris had traveled far, carried by currents the way a leaf is carried across a quiet pond. And somewhere beneath those warm currents, something vast and still rests in a quiet the barnacles only hinted at. Somewhere far out across the southern Indian Ocean, the night water moves in long, slow swells beneath a pale and patient moon. The surface catches that silver light and holds it for a moment, then lets it go as the next wave quietly passes through. It was here, in this vast and unhurried expanse, that the first fragments of flight MH370 began their long, quiet drift westward. A piece of wing flap, pale and weathered, rides the crest of a swell and descends gently into the valley between. The ocean does not hurry it along, it simply carries it, the way the sea carries all things in time. 18 months passed before that Flaperon washed quietly onto the volcanic shore of Réunion Island, far to the west. A beachcomber found it resting among the titiline stones, half covered in barnacles, unhurried in its arrival. Barnacles themselves tell quiet stories, the species clinging to the wreckage spoke of warm open ocean waters, far from any coast. The Flaperon was confirmed as belonging to a Boeing 777, the same type as flight MH370, and the world grew still for a moment. In the months and years that followed, more fragments arrived on distant shores, a piece of horizontal stabilizer, sections of cabin interior. Each fragment had drifted thousands of kilometers, carried by the great slow gyres of the southern Indian Ocean. Scientists traced backward through ocean current models, and each line led quietly to the same arc of open water. And so the debris drifts still, patient and unhurried, each piece a quiet witness to something the ocean has not yet chosen to tell. Beneath the southern Indian Ocean, the seafloor rises and falls in slow, ancient ridges that no cartographer had yet named. These mountains had formed over millions of quiet years, shaped by the slow drift of tectonic plates far below the surface. When search teams first lowered their sonar instruments into these waters, they found a world that human eyes had never seen. The sonar pulses traveled downward for minutes before returning, carrying the quiet shapes of peaks and valleys far below. Some of these underwater mountains stood taller than anything on the surface nearby, silent and completely alone in the deep. They were called seamounts, and they had waited in the dark water for all of recorded history without a name. The ships moved slowly above them, trailing long cables behind, listening for signals that might not come. Slowly, the sonar maps began to fill in, one careful pass at a time, revealing a landscape of extraordinary stillness. There were flat abyssal plains stretching for hundreds of kilometers, interrupted only by the occasional gentle rise of an ancient peak. In time, scientists gave these places names, small human words laid over geography that had existed long before any word. The crews aboard the search vessels moved quietly from station to station, their instruments humming in the cool air above these depths. Far below, in the silence where no light had ever reached, the seafloor held its shape unchanged for ages. And somewhere within that vast and unnamed geography, the ocean kept its quiet patience, unhurried and still. Far below the searching vessels, the ocean floor lay still and undisturbed, waiting in the cold and patient dark. Teams aboard the research ships lowered their sonar equipment slowly, cable unspooling in long quiet loops toward the unseen bottom. The sonar pulses traveled downward through thousands of meters of water, spreading out like gentle ripples into absolute stillness. Each returning echo carried a faint portrait of the terrain below, ridges, valleys, and plains that no human eye had ever seen. The search zone covered an area of ocean larger than many countries, its floor as varied and complex as any landscape on land. Slowly the sonar sleds were towed along the seabed, their beams sweeping methodically from side to side in long, careful arcs. In the ship's operations room, technicians watched the images appear on their screens, one quiet line of data at a time. The seafloor here was ancient and undisturbed, covered in a soft layer of sediment that had gathered over millions of quiet years. Occasionally the sonar revealed a gentle volcanic ridge rising from the plain, its slopes pale and unhurried in the cold water. Each scan was processed, compared, and carefully filed away, another quiet record in the long, patient search. The ships moved slowly, barely disturbing the surface above as the sonar continued its silent work far beneath them. Somewhere in those depths, perhaps, a resting place existed, though the ocean floor kept its silence, as it always had. And so the sonar pulses continued their long journey downward, each one asking a quiet question the deep water never quite answered. Far below the searching vessels, the towfish moved slowly through the deep, its sonar pinging softly against the empty water. The device hung suspended on a long cable, trailing behind the ship like a quiet silver thought drifting through the blue. Each slow sweep of its sensors painted a picture of the seafloor below, ridge by ridge, hollow by hollow. The southern Indian Ocean stretched beneath them in gentle undulations, a vast and unhurried landscape of sediment and stone. Hour after hour the towfish traced its steady lines, covering ground measured in careful kilometers rather than miles. Above on the ship, technicians watched the returning signal settle onto their screens in soft, scrolling lines of gray and blue. When the sensors found something unusual, the image would subtly shift, a shadow where no shadow had been before. The towfish moved so slowly that an hour might pass before a single feature of the bottom came fully into view. In this way the search unfolded not with urgency, but with a kind of patient, nautical meditation. The seafloor of this remote stretch held ancient volcanic ridges, folded and worn smooth by millions of quiet years. Occasionally a slow current would shift the towfish gently sideways, and the sonar image would tilt, then settle again. The cable connecting the device to the ship was kilometers long, and it moved with the slow weight of something deeply patient. And somewhere in all that careful silence, the seafloor held whatever answers it held, undisturbed and still. Far beneath the surface, the seafloor around the southern Indian Ocean lies undisturbed, as it has for thousands of years. The sediment there has settled slowly, grain by grain, carried down through miles of cold water over countless centuries. Each thin layer is a record of time passing quietly, undisturbed by storms above or currents below. When search vessels first ascended their instruments here, the seafloor greeted them with a stillness almost impossible to imagine. Sonar pulses drifted downward slowly, tracing the soft contours of ridges and plains that no instrument had ever mapped before. The seafloor here is among the least visited places on Earth, quieter even than the surface of distant moons. Sediment cores pulled slowly to the surface held within them layers deposited before human memory began. In those layers, researchers found no sign of disturbance, no trace of anything that had ever fallen from the sky. The ocean kept its silence here, as it always had, patient and unhurried across geological time. Search submarines drifted slowly above the sediment plain, their lights casting a soft glow across a landscape unchanged for ages. In some places the sediment lay so softly that the weight of a single instrument could press a gentle mark into it. And somewhere nearby, perhaps, something rests within that softness, slowly settling into the same ancient quiet. The sediment does not hurry, and it does not speak, and the ocean above it breathes on slowly through the years. Far above the Indian Ocean, a satellite drifted quietly in its orbit, its instruments cool and unhurried in the silence of space. It was not a communications satellite in the usual sense, but an old one, resting between tasks, its receivers still gently listening. Deep in a data center in England, engineers noticed something unusual arriving in the logs from that distant machine. The satellite had been exchanging small automatic handshakes with a plane below, tiny electronic whispers sent every hour through the night. These signals were not voice, not data, only a quiet mathematical ping, the way one clock checks another across a great distance. 7 such handshakes were recorded through the long hours of that night, each one arriving from somewhere over the vast southern waters. Engineers slowly began to measure the tiny delay in each signal, the way sound stretches when its source moves gently away. That small stretch, almost imperceptible, told them something about where the aircraft had been when each whisper left it. Slowly, patiently, they drew a curved line across the Southern Ocean, not a position but a region, a soft boundary of possibility. The aircraft could have been anywhere along that arc, a crescent of open water stretching far toward the empty south. It was a strange kind of knowledge, knowing not where something was, but only the shape of where it might have been. The satellite itself had no memory of the plane, only the data it had faithfully kept, like a lighthouse recording distant passing lights. And somewhere out there, beneath those quiet southern skies, the ocean held its silence as it always had. Slowly, the investigators turned to the mathematics of arcs, those patient curves traced across the southern hemisphere's vast charts. Each arc was drawn from a satellite signal, a quiet handshake exchanged between the aircraft and a station far overhead. The signals arrived in gentle pulses, spaced hours apart, each one narrowing the possible paths the aircraft might have taken. On the charts, those arcs curved southward like the gentle bend of a river finding its way to the sea. The 7th arc, the last, stretched across a remote corridor of ocean far from any land or shipping lane. Down there, the water runs extraordinarily deep, the seafloor a quiet, ancient place of ridges and plains. Analysts spread these charts across wide tables, tracing each arc with steady hands, thinking carefully, unhurried. The arcs told a story of fuel and distance, of an aircraft flying on through the long, still hours of the southern night. Somewhere along that final arc, the engines would have grown quiet, and the aircraft would have descended slowly toward the water. The ocean there receives very little light from above and very little disturbance from the winds that blow elsewhere. It is one of the most isolated stretches of water on Earth, a place where silence gathers naturally. The arcs drawn on those charts remain, patient and precise, marking the edge of what was knowable. And somewhere beneath the surface of that quiet sea, the answer waits, unhurried, in the deep blue calm. As the first pale light touched the horizon, the analysts spread their charts across the wide table, smoothing the edges with quiet hands. The Indian Ocean, vast and unhurried, holds its currents like slow breath, drifting in wide arcs no eye can follow in a single glance. Wind patterns from that March night were carefully traced, each arrow drawn by a careful pencil onto pale blue paper. Somewhere far out to the west, a buoy drifted slowly southward, tilting with the swell, recording the ocean's quiet memory. Oceanographers overlaid the drift models one by one, each transparent sheet settling like a leaf onto still water. The currents that carried the Flaperon to Réunion were redrawn now with finer lines, tracing 17 months of slow, patient wandering. Each recalculation moved the probable origin point a little, the way a compass needle settles very gradually when the ship turns. There was something patient about this work, the way the scientists returned each morning to the same coordinates, the same quiet ocean. The Agulhas Current, one of the strongest on Earth, swept northward along the African coast, quietly reshaping every calculation. Tiny fragments of debris, some no larger than a hand, had their own invisible paths drawn beneath them through years of drift. And with each new wind chart, the search area grew clearer and also somehow larger, the way a long hallway seems to extend as you walk it. The analysts rolled the finished charts carefully, securing them with quiet precision, ready to be compared again the next morning. Out on the ocean itself, nothing stirred but the slow deep current running south, carrying its secrets gently beneath the pale dawn. Somewhere far above the sleeping world, the cockpit of MH370 drifted through a sky thick with stars and silence. The instrument panels glowed their quiet amber and green, steady as candlelight in a still room. Below, the South China Sea lay dark and vast, its surface catching only faint reflections of the moon. The pilots had spoken their last reported words to Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control, calm and routine, nothing unusual in the tone. "Good night, Malaysian 370, they said, and those quiet words dissolved into the frequencies of the open sky. Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder went silent, no alarm, no distress call, simply a fading from the screens of those watching below. The plane continued westward, crossing above the Malay Peninsula as quietly as a cloud crossing the moon. From the ground, observers tracked a secondary radar return, an unnamed shape moving deliberately through the air. It crossed the Andaman Sea at cruising altitude, the kind of height where the curvature of the Earth begins gently to show. No one on the surface knew its heading. The aircraft had become, in those quiet hours, a shape without a name. The cabin behind the darkened cockpit held its passengers in the stillness of high-altitude night, the hum of engines steady and low. Somewhere below, the Indian Ocean stretched without end, its deep troughs and slow currents indifferent to everything passing above. And the cockpit, wherever it was, held its instruments in quiet readiness, as the sky around it slowly brightened toward a dawn no one would confirm. Far above the still water, the stars moved in their ancient slow arc, indifferent and unhurried. The southern Indian Ocean stretched in every direction, vast and quiet, a mirror for the sky above. Search vessels moved slowly across that water, their lights small and warm against the immense dark. Instruments aboard those ships scanned the depths, listening for any faint echo from far below. The water here is among the deepest on Earth, for kilometers below the keel of any ship above. Down in that depth, the pressure is immense, and the silence is a kind of absolute stillness. Above, the stars completed one slow turn, and the search ships remained, patient on the surface. Somewhere in that water, a flight recorder emits a signal, a quiet ping that fades with each passing year. The families of those aboard kept their own kind of vigil, quiet and enduring, far from this ocean. On the surface, a gentle swell moved through the search zone, lifting and lowering each vessel slowly. A crew member on watch stood at the rail, looking out at water that gave nothing back. The stars slowly faded as the first pale light of morning spread along the horizon from the east. And still the ocean held its quiet, as it had the night before, and the night before that. Somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean, the last automated signal from MH370 faded quietly into the pre-dawn air. No voice came through after that, only the gentle hiss of an empty frequency, like wind across open water. Ground controllers in Kuala Lumpur watched their screens, waiting for a return signal that never arrived. The silence on the frequency was not the silence of static, it was the particular quiet of something that had simply ceased to respond. Radar traces that had moved steadily west suddenly bent south, tracing a long arc no one had planned or predicted. For hours, satellite handshakes, quiet electronic pulses, continued, like a slow and faithful breath from somewhere far away. Each handshake told only that the aircraft still existed somewhere, not where, not why, not what had happened inside. The final partial handshake arrived at 8:19 in the morning, an incomplete signal that ended mid-transmission and was never answered. Investigators would later sit with that signal for months, turning it slowly in their hands like something fragile. The arc it defined stretched in a long curve across the Southern Ocean, narrowing possibilities but never resolving into certainty. Search vessels moved slowly across that arc for months, trailing equipment through water so deep it would swallow sound whole. Below them, the seafloor lay undisturbed in its ancient quiet, holding whatever answers might rest there beyond the reach of light. And the radio frequency that MH370 last touched remains assigned, waiting still, as though the channel itself has not quite given up hope. Along coastlines far from any airport, families gathered quietly where the water met the shore. They brought small candles, cupped in their hands against the evening wind, and set them gently in the sand. The flames bent and steadied, as the sea moved slowly beyond them in the gray light. Some wrote names on paper lanterns and released them, watching them rise until they became indistinguishable from stars. In Beijing, in Kuala Lumpur, in small towns whose names few outside them knew, the same quiet ritual unfolded. There were photographs placed in frames, scarves left folded on chairs, a pair of glasses no one moved. Children who had been too young to understand now grew slowly into an understanding that offered no comfort. Time passed the way it does in grief, not in a straight line but in circles, returning always to the same questions. The southern Indian Ocean stretched on beyond every map edge, indifferent and enormous, keeping its own slow counsel. Somewhere beneath that water, or perhaps not there at all, the answers rested in absolute silence. Families continued to write letters to authorities, to search organizations, to anyone who might still be listening. And slowly, gently, the world beyond their grief moved on, while they remained at the shore. The candles would be lit again next year, and the year after, patient as the tide. In quiet rooms far from the ocean, analysts sat with printouts of faint satellite signals, listening for patterns only mathematics could hear. The signals were called handshakes, brief automatic pings the aircraft sent to a satellite drifting high above the Indian Ocean. Each handshake carried a faint timing delay, and in that delay, like the echo of a stone dropped into still water, lay a clue. Analysts measured how long each signal took to arrive, and from those quiet intervals, they traced an arc across the southern sky. The arc curved southward over open water, a region so remote that no ship had reason to sail there and no eye had looked before. There was also a Doppler shift hidden in the signals, the same gentle stretching of frequency that tells you how fast a sound moves away. From that shift, the analysts could determine that the aircraft had been moving southward, not northward, through the long dark hours. 7 handshakes in all, each one a faint whisper from a machine that did not know it was alone above the clouds. The last handshake arrived at 2:19 in the morning, local time, a signal so brief it lasted less than a breath. After that, silence. The satellite waited patiently for a reply that never came, its antenna still and attentive in the cold of space. The arc the signals described became known as the seventh arc, a gentle curve drawn in mathematics across the loneliest ocean on Earth. Ships and aircraft were sent to search along that arc, crossing waters where the swells rolled quietly in every direction without end. And somewhere beneath those slow swells, the signal suggested, lay the answer to a question the world had asked very softly, and had not yet heard answered. Somewhere beneath the southern Indian Ocean, the water deepens into a stillness that has no name. Search vessels have drifted here, their instruments trailing slowly through water colder than any wind. The ocean floor here rises and falls in ridges no human eye has ever seen in full. Flaperin, a single piece of wing, washed quietly onto a beach in Réunion Island in July 2015. It had drifted for nearly 16 months through warm and quiet currents before finding land. The currents of the southern Indian Ocean move in a slow, ancient gyre, wide as a continent. In those months the sea held its secret without urgency, carrying a small piece of wing as gently as driftwood. Other fragments were found after, along the coast of Mozambique, in Tanzania, near Madagascar, each arriving quietly. Each piece carried its own slow journey, months and years at sea before the tide brought it in. The aircraft itself has never been found, resting somewhere below in a silence the sea keeps easily. Families of those aboard have waited through years that grew quieter and quieter without resolution. The mystery of MH370 does not demand an answer tonight, it asks only to be held gently, like water in open hands. And the ocean continues its turning, slow and unchanged, holding its quiet beneath every passing cloud. And slowly, the surface of the Southern Ocean settles back into its long, unbroken rhythm, wave after wave. Whatever the sea once held, it holds now in silence, beneath fathoms of cool, unhurried water. Search vessels have come and gone across these latitudes, their wakes dissolving long before they reach the far horizon. The seabed here, some 4,000 meters below, is carpeted in fine gray sediment, undisturbed for centuries. Slowly, silt settles over every surface down there, the way snow settles over a quiet field at night. Whatever rests on that floor becomes, in time, a part of the seabed itself, gently covered and kept. The Indian Ocean does not give back what it takes, it simply holds things, quietly, in the deep. Even the debris found on distant shores, a flaperin, a flap panel, arrived only after long ocean drifting. Those shores are thousands of kilometers from where the flight ended, separated by months of slow current. And the currents themselves move at their own pace, indifferent, looping slowly through the southern hemisphere. Wave after wave, season after season, the sea erases the surface record of what once passed through it. And yet, somewhere beneath all of that moving water, the answers remain, resting in the still and the cold. The sea keeps what it knows, softly, the way the night keeps its quiet long after the stars have set. Far to the south, where the Indian Ocean stretches beyond every chart, the water holds its silence like a kept secret. Somewhere beneath that pale horizon, a silver wing may rest on the seafloor, still and undisturbed. The search ships moved slowly across those waters for years, trailing their instruments through the deep. Their sonar beams swept wide arcs across ridges and plains that no human eye had ever seen. On the surface above, the sky was often empty and vast, just cloud and wind and the long swell of open water. Investigators traced the final satellite handshakes, those quiet electronic pulses sent through the dark between plane and satellite. Each ping drew a thin arc across the globe, narrowing the vast ocean to a corridor of possibility. A small piece of wing, a flaperin, washed gently onto a beach on Réunion Island, salt pale and worn. It had traveled for more than a year on slow ocean currents before reaching that quiet shore. Other fragments followed over the following seasons, each one turning up on a distant coast, unhurried and salt-worn. The families of those aboard kept their own quiet vigil, holding photographs and waiting for the sea to speak. And the deep itself remained as it had always been, patient and immense, keeping whatever it holds far below the light. The horizon that swallowed a silver wing lies there still, untroubled and wide, and the ocean does not explain itself. And slowly, the long story of MH370 settles into the quiet dark of the southern Indian Ocean, vast and still. Somewhere far below those gentle swells, the ocean floor holds its silence, unhurried and undisturbed. The search vessels that once crisscrossed these waters have long since returned to port, leaving only open sea. Drift buoys released by researchers still move slowly with the currents, tracing quiet paths across the blue. The Inmarsat satellite that received those final faint pings still orbits high above, patient and steady. 7 arcs drawn by mathematicians trace invisible lines across the Indian Ocean, unanswered questions made into geometry. A few small pieces of the aircraft have drifted ashore on distant beaches, carried by gentle currents over years. On Réunion Island, where the first flapper came to rest, the tide still moves in and out with the same unhurried rhythm. 239 people were on board that night, and the ocean has kept its quiet counsel ever since. Families who still wait for answers have learned to live alongside the unanswered, the way one learns to live alongside the sea. The deep water of the southern Indian Ocean is among the most remote on Earth, a place where silence is simply the natural state. And tonight, as you rest, that water is still out there, softly turning with the slow rotation of the Earth beneath you. Some questions stay open, and in the staying open, they become a kind of rest, a place where the mind can simply float.